In 2016, a construction crew for the New York City subway broke through a wall. Behind it was a street, an entire street with gas lamps, shop windows, and a paved roadway. It was located 50 feet, or 15 meters beneath modern Manhattan. The area was immediately closed off. Workers were forced to sign non-disclosure agreements. The official report stated, "Technical glitch, nothing found." But photographs had already leaked online. What was captured in them challenges everything you knew about the history of New York, because if another city is hidden beneath the world's most famous metropolis, who built it? When? And most importantly, why is there silence about it? Let's start with an observation. Open Google Maps, turn on Street View, take a walk through Manhattan, Fifth Avenue, Broadway, any street. Now pay attention to the buildings, specifically their first floors. Do you see those small stairs at every entrance, 5 to 7 steps up from the sidewalk level? Now the question is, why? The standard explanation sounds logical, protection from snow and rainwater. But look at old photographs of New York from the late 1890s. In photos from the 1880s, people are entering those same buildings at the level of the modern second floor, no stairs, right from the street. What changed? Did the buildings rise, or did the streets sink? There is a document, the 1811 Commissioner's Plan for Manhattan. Official history calls this the standardization of urban development, but if you carefully read the archival records of the engineers of that time, you find strange phrases: removal of sediment, clearing of lower levels, filling in of old foundations. Sediment from what? What old foundations if the city was just being built? In 2003, while laying a water pipe on Wall Street, workers hit stone masonry. They dug deeper, and beneath the modern foundation, they found another foundation, then another. 3 levels of foundations, one under the other. Each was a finished structure. Archaeologist David Kendall, who participated in the examination, would later say in an interview with a small local newspaper, "The bottom level was made using a technique we didn't use in America until the 1850s, but it was located under a layer dated to the 1820s. 2 weeks after the interview was published, Kendall was fired from the university. The official reason was budget cuts. However, his department received a $2 million grant in that same quarter. Coincidence? Perhaps, or perhaps the context is becoming more important. Because Kendall wasn't the first. In 1991, engineer Michael Brody from the Department of Transportation began photographing underground anomalies during a subway expansion. Arched corridors not marked on any map, rooms with remains of crown molding on the ceilings, stairs leading even deeper. Brody collected 47 photographs. He planned an article for the City Journal. The archives of the New York Public Library contain bills for earth excavation from the 1810s. The volumes are staggering, 4.2 million cubic meters of earth. This is equivalent to completely burying an area of 40 city blocks to a depth of 10 meters. Question: where did this earth come from in the center of the city, and what exactly were they burying? Fact number 2. The Museum of the City of New York has a collection of artifacts found during 19th century excavation work. Among them are ceramic fragments dated by experts to 1600–1650. They are European production, but the European settlement on Manhattan was officially founded in 1624 and consisted of 30 people in wooden shacks. Where did the porcelain and stained glass come from? Fact number 3. There are daguerreotypes from the 1850s showing buildings in Lower Manhattan. In some of them, a strange detail is captured. The windows of the basement floors are half buried in earth. Not snow, earth. In the middle of summer. It's as if the city is sinking, or has already sunk. Now for the most interesting part. In 1912, civil engineer James Foreman published a technical report on the state of Manhattan's foundations. There is a paragraph that is usually skipped. During the deepening of a foundation pit on Madison Avenue, remains of a paved road were discovered at a depth of 22 feet, or 6.7 meters. The stone is European cobblestone. The quality of the laying exceeds modern standards. Origin unknown. 22 feet underground, a road of better quality than what was being built in 1912. Foreman recommended further research. His recommendation was ignored. But enthusiasts do not ignore it, and this is where it gets truly strange. Because if you start looking, the stories repeat. Different people, different years, the same pattern. Someone finds something under New York, tries to talk about it, and silence. In 2008, a blogger under the nickname Urban Explorer published a series of posts about underground New York. Photographs of subway tunnels where walled-up doors are visible, arches leading into a void. He wrote, "Tomorrow I'm going to check a branch under Grand Central. There's a sign for level J, but the maps only show levels A through G." The post gained 50,000 views in 24 hours. Tomorrow never came. The blog was deleted. The account vanished. Only screenshots of his last message remain on forums. "Don't go there. I was wrong." What did he see? You might say these are just urban legends, scary stories, or creepypasta. And you would be right, partially, because urban legends don't appear out of nowhere. Ask any experienced New York subway worker, unofficially, over a beer when no one is listening. Many will confirm there are sections in the tunnels they are asked not to enter. Technical zones, mothballed levels. One worker, who asked to remain anonymous, said, "In 1998, I was inspecting Line 6. I noticed something odd. The rails went into a dead end, but according to the documents, there should have been a turn. I went to check. I found a walled-up arch. The bricks were new, clearly a recent job. I shone my flashlight through the cracks. Behind the wall, the tunnel continued, with rails. It went down at an incline. I reported it. They told me, 'Forget it, that's not your section,' even though I was responsible for that entire stretch." He silenced, then added, "You know what bothers me? The rails behind the wall. They were different, wider. We haven't used those since the 1920s. What we are discussing isn't just the history of one city. These are questions about how we learn about the past. Who decides what is truth and what is a conspiracy theory? There are 47 buildings in central New York officially built in the 1900s that contain technological solutions only officially invented in the 1950s. Anti-seismic foundations, ventilation systems with heat recovery. The documents exist. The strangest thing is not that there is something under New York. The strangest thing is that the upper city seems to have been built specifically to hide the lower one, and the evidence is literally beneath our feet. Look at a photograph of a typical Manhattan house from the late 19th century. Brownstone, the brown sandstone characteristic of that period. The entrance door is at the second floor level. Beneath it are the small basement windows. Now an observation. These basement windows, they're full-sized, with decorative trim, arched vaults, and sometimes stained glass, exactly like the windows of the living floors above. Why put stained glass in a basement? What if it's not a basement? There's an architectural term, the English basement. This is a semi-basement floor where kitchens and servants' rooms were usually located. But in English townhouses, these rooms are 3 to 5 feet below street level. In New York, the basements go 10 to 13 feet down, and they have ceiling heights of 11.5 feet, higher than in modern apartments. This isn't a basement. It's a full floor buried in the ground. Documentary filmmaker Andrew Morgan conducted a study in 2015. He measured the height of basement floors in 200 buildings built between 1880 and 1920. The result? The average height was 11.2 feet. For comparison, the official building standard of that time for living spaces was 8.8 feet, and for basements, it was 7.2 feet. Morgan's conclusion? These spaces were originally planned as living or public areas, not technical ones. Morgan wanted to publish his study in Architectural Digest. The editors refused, conclusions too speculative. He posted the data on a personal website. The site lasted 3 months, then crashed. It couldn't be restored. The hosting company reported a violation of terms of use but didn't specify which ones. Only a few enthusiasts still have copies of the study. But let's look wider, because it's not just about individual buildings. The entire Manhattan Island is built at a strange height. The average street level in the center of the island is 33 to 40 feet above sea level. That's a lot, too much for a natural river island. For comparison, Roosevelt Island, located just half a mile away, has an average height of 10 to 16 feet. Where did the extra 30 feet come from? The official version? Natural terrain. Manhattan is a rocky island with elevations. But look at a geological map made in the 1850s before mass construction. There are indeed elevations, but they are localized. In the area of the future Central Park, in the north of the island, the southern part where the financial district, City Hall, and all of lower Manhattan are, on old maps, this is relatively flat territory, 13 to 20 feet above the water. The modern height is 36 to 42 feet. The difference? About 23 feet, a layer of earth as thick as a two-story house. In New York history textbooks, there's a vague phrase, "During the planning of the city, the terrain was leveled." Sounds logical. Hills were leveled, valleys were filled. But look at the numbers from the same archival documents of the 1811 Urban Planning Department. The volume of soil removed was 800,000 cubic meters. The volume of soil brought in was 3.4 million cubic meters. They took away 800,000. They brought in 3.4 million. The difference is 2.6 million cubic meters of earth that wasn't originally on the island. Where did it come from? The documents say from quarries in New Jersey and Brooklyn. Fine. But why? Why raise the city by 23 feet instead of building on the existing level? Protection from floods? Manhattan is surrounded by rivers, but the tides there are minimal, about 5 feet. Even taking storms into account, a rise of 10 to 13 feet would have been sufficient. Why 23 feet? Now pay attention to photographs of the leveling process. There are rare blurry photos from the 1810s and 1820s. In them, workers aren't leveling hills, they're filling in pits, huge pits where the outlines of walls are visible. In one of the photos stored in the New York Historical Society archive, catalog number PR020-1-1818, you can distinguish a fragment of an arched window sticking out of the ground. Around it are carts dumping soil. The window is gradually disappearing. The caption under the photo? Grading work, Broadway, 1818. There is no mention of what they are burying, only the neutral grading work. Language is also context. When direct words are avoided, it's worth thinking about. Researchers have collected a gallery of such photos, about 30 of them. Most capture the same process, burial. Foundations sticking out of the ground are being buried. Streets going down are being buried. Entrances to buildings are being buried. In one image, approximate date 1815, a group of people is standing on the roof of a building, but they are standing at the level of the surrounding ground, because the building is already half buried. Its roof has become the new ground. Is there an alternative explanation? Of course. One could assume these were old, ruined buildings from the colonial period that they decided not to demolish, but simply bury and build on top of. More economical? Perhaps. But then another question arises. If these were colonial buildings from the 1600s or 1700s, why were they made of stone rather than wood? Wooden construction was the norm for American colonies. Stone was expensive. It was brought from Europe or quarried with great difficulty. Why would colonists, barely making ends meet, build stone buildings with arched windows and moldings? And here we come to the strangest fact. In the 1960s, during the construction of the World Trade Center Foundation, the deepest pit in New York history was dug, 70 feet, 21 meters below street level. Engineers discovered a layered soil structure. The top layer was fill, 33 to 40 feet deep, with a mixed composition, earth, construction debris, brick fragments, dated to the 19th century. This matches the grading of the 1810s. Below that was a thin layer of silt, 12 to 20 inches thick, river silt, dated to the early 19th century, and beneath that was another fill layer, 13 to 16 feet. The composition was similar: earth, construction debris, stone fragments, but the date was the mid to late 18th century. 2 layers of fill, with a 50 to 70-year difference, separated by a layer of silt. What does this mean? One explanation: the city was buried twice, the first time in the mid-1700s, the second time in the 1810s. Why twice? Or did the city end up buried under sediment and people built anew on top of the ruins each time? The official WTC construction report mentions these layers as evidence of coastal changes and early economic activity. Vague, no details. But one of the engineers, Robert Hines, would later write in his memoirs, Foundations, Building the Twin Towers, 1985, "We were surprised by the number of artifacts in the lower layer. These weren't just scraps. These were remains of structures, arches, parts of walls, even a fragment of a mosaic floor. The quality of work was high. We joked that we had found the Manhattan Atlantis. Management asked us not to emphasize this in the reports." Why? Maybe the answer lies not in what was buried, but why it had to be buried. And here an event appears that is almost never mentioned in textbooks, but which could have changed everything. In official history, this is the year the Commissioner's Plan was adopted, the project for Manhattan's street grid, a boring bureaucratic event. But if you dig deeper into newspapers of that time, personal diaries, church records, a different picture emerges. January 11, 1811, a series of unusually warm days in the middle of winter. The temperature rises to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, plus 15 degrees Celsius. In 3 days, all the snow accumulated since November melts. The Hudson and East Rivers overflow. But this wasn't just a flood. In the diary of merchant John Pintard, kept at the New York Historical Society, is an entry from January 14th. The water did not come from the rivers. It rose from beneath the ground. On Pearl Street, the soil cracked and a torrent gushed out. The earth seemed to be vomiting a river from within. Similar descriptions appear in the diaries of 3 other Lower Manhattan residents. All mention the same phenomenon: water bursting from underground. Official records of this event are almost non-existent. The New York Mayor's office mentions a minor spring flood, nothing more. But there is indirect evidence. Insurance companies of the time reported massive property damage in the lower part of the city in the first quarter of 1811. The payout amount was a record for that period, equivalent to $40 million in today's money. For a minor flood? Now look at the dates. The Commissioner's Plan, the official urban grading, begins in March 1811, 2 months after the flood. Coincidence or cause and effect? There is a version, not popular, not academically recognized, but existing, that in 1811 something more than a flood occurred, a disaster that was masked as urban reorganization. Proponents of this theory point to the global context. 1811 to 1812. Climate anomalies were recorded all over the world: floods in Europe, droughts in China, earthquakes in South America. In December 1811, a series of powerful earthquakes hit the Mississippi Valley. The magnitude is estimated at 7.5 to 8.0. The earth cracked for hundreds of miles. The Mississippi River changed course. Eyewitnesses described lakes of mud appearing in minutes, swallowing trees and houses. This was 900 miles away from New York. Could similar processes have affected the East Coast? Geologists are skeptical. Manhattan is on a stable platform. Earthquakes there are rare and weak. But there is a nuance. Manhattan is an island. Beneath it is not solid rock, but mix of granite outcrops and layers of softer sediments, plus numerous underground water flows. Under certain conditions, for example during seismic activity or a sharp change in groundwater levels, a phenomenon called soil liquefaction can occur. The soil loses its load-bearing capacity and turns into something like a liquid. Buildings sink, streets go down. This isn't science fiction. It's a known phenomenon, especially for areas with fill dirt. And Manhattan, as we remember, has a 23-foot layer of fill. Imagine, January 1811, an abnormal thaw. Groundwater rises sharply. It saturates the fill layer. Simultaneously, echoes of seismic activity from the west, even if weak. The soil liquefies. Buildings built on this fill, meaning the upper-level buildings, begin to sink, not all at once, gradually, over days or weeks. Streets crack, foundations tilt. Groundwater saturated with silt, bursts from the cracks. Panic, chaos, and inability to understand what is happening. And then, a decision, not to try and save, not to dig out, simply to bury, to bring in new soil, to raise the level even higher, to create a new surface, to build anew, to erase what happened. This is only a theory, a hypothesis, not proven, but it explains a lot. The suddenness of the grading, the scale of the burial, the silence of the documents. And it explains the maps, because there are maps of New York drawn before 1811 that do not match what we see today. David Grimm's 1813 map, compiled based on the results of a recent survey, shows Lower Manhattan with a completely different street grid than the 1811 Commissioner's Plan. Streets intersect at different angles. Some blocks have different shapes. It's as if they are different cities. The explanation provided is that Grimm used old data, a cartographer's error. But Grimm was an official city surveyor. His job was accuracy. And here's the strangest part. There's a series of maps dated 1790 to 1808 where Manhattan is depicted with far more buildings than the city's population could explain. Joseph-François Mongean's 1803 map shows about 4,000 structures on the island. The 1800 census shows 60,000 people. If you count 15 people per house, a typical ratio for that time, you get 4,000 houses. It matches. But here's what's interesting. Mongean's map shows these structures not only in the southern part of the island where the city was located. They stretch far to the north along all of Manhattan, chains of buildings along roads, compact blocks in the area of the future Central Park. Official history says northern Manhattan in the 1800s was practically deserted. Farms, small villages. Real development would only start after the 1830s. But on the map, buildings, hundreds of buildings. Was Mongean wrong? Did he embellish to impress? Then why? The map was made for city authorities for practical use. Fantasies had no place there. Or he drew what he saw, and then it disappeared, after 1811. These are questions with no clear answers. If you feel the official version doesn't explain everything, consider the buildings that survived 1811, because there is something wrong with them. Their architecture, the technologies used there, and who could have built it all.
The Flatiron Building opens. 285 feet, 22 floors. One of New York's first skyscrapers. Officially, it was built in 2 years. Steel frame, terracotta cladding, advanced engineering. Now look at the construction photos. They show the technology. First, the steel frame is mounted, columns, beams. Then the walls are attached, the classic skyscraper method. But notice one detail. In a photo from July 1902, the frame is not yet finished. Workers are visible on the 15th floor mounting beams. But in the foreground, at the base of the building, the facade is already finished, with ornaments, with molding, with perfectly fitted stone elements. The molding was installed before the frame was finished? Standard construction logic. First the frame, then the finish. Otherwise, the finish could be damaged during the installation of upper floors. But here, the finish is already in place, and it looks as if it has always been there. There is an alternative interpretation whispered in architectural circles. The Flatiron was completed, not built from scratch. What if the base of the building, the lower 3 or 4 floors, already existed? What if the builders discovered a foundation and lower levels and simply built on top of them? Added a steel frame, turned an old building into a skyscraper? There is no proof, only indirect observations. The quality of the molding on the lower floors of the Flatiron is significantly higher on the upper ones. The detail, the depth of the relief, the complexity of the ornament. It's as if different masters worked on it, or different eras. Let's take a simpler example. City Hall, built in 1811. Officially, it is a magnificent building. Marble facade, French Renaissance style, elegant columns, luxurious interiors. A rotunda with a floating dome, a spiral staircase where every step is a work of art. Question: how was this built in 1811? Let's look at the context. 1811 New York. Population 96,000 people. Of those, at most, a few hundred were skilled masons and carvers. The marble was imported from Massachusetts. The tools were manual. For comparison, building a similarly scaled building in Europe at that time took 10 to 15 years and required hundreds of masters. City Hall was built in 9 years, from 1802 to 1811. Possible? Yes, given resources, will, and money. But look at the budget. The official cost of construction was $500,000. Adjusted for today, that's about $15 million. For that money today, you could barely build a small office center, let alone a marble palace with hand carving. Where did that efficiency come from? One of the architects of City Hall, John McComb Jr., left diaries. In them, there is a strange entry from 1803. Foundation work is progressing faster than expected. Old stone supports of excellent quality discovered. Decided to incorporate them into the structure. Savings in funds and time are significant. Old stone supports in 1803, in a place where, according to history, there were no stone structures. McComb does not elaborate. No more mentions. It's as if he realized he said too much.
Moving on, the New York Public Library, opened in 1911, a majestic Beaux Arts building, white marble, Corinthian columns, lions at the entrance. Officially, construction took 9 years, from 1902 to 1911. Now look at the technology. The building is built using the stone masonry technique. Each block of marble is carefully fitted to the next without mortar or with a minimal amount. This is an old technique requiring the highest level of skill. In the early 20th century, this technique was almost never used anymore. It was slow, expensive, and required unique skills. Builders had switched to steel frames and concrete. But the library was built exactly like that. Why? The official explanation: the architects wanted a classical style, a faithfulness to tradition. But there is an engineering problem. The library building weighs about 150,000 tons. For such a weight, a massive foundation is needed. In 1902, this would have meant piles driven 70 to 100 feet deep to Manhattan's bedrock. Archival documents indicate the library foundation is set at a depth of 40 feet. That's not much, not enough for such a weight by the standards of that time. But the building stands for over a century, without cracks, without sinking. One of the civil engineers, Walter Koch, wrote in a private letter to a colleague in 1910, "I don't understand how it works. Calculations show the foundation shouldn't hold, but it does. It's as if there is additional support from below that we didn't account for." Additional support, underground. What if the library wasn't built on a blank spot, but on the foundation of an older, more massive building that was partially used as a base? And here we come to the most provocative observation. In New York, there are about 50 buildings built between 1880 and 1920 that contain architectural elements far too perfect for their time. For example, marble columns over 3 feet in diameter, carved from a single piece. In the early 20th century, such columns were made in sections. Solid ones were too expensive and difficult to transport. Acoustic effects in halls. In Carnegie Hall, 1891, there are spots where a whisper spoken on stage can be heard in the last row of the balcony. This requires precise acoustic calculations, a science that only really developed in the 1930s. Ventilation systems with natural air circulation based on temperature and pressure differences. In some old buildings, these systems still work today, even though their principle was only rediscovered by engineers in the 1950s. Coincidences? Luck? The genius of individual architects? Or knowledge that already existed but was forgotten or hidden? There is a theory that many new New York buildings from the late 19th and early 20th centuries are actually restorations, completions, or adaptations of much older structures. That builders of that time found ruins, foundations, and fragments of buildings under layers of earth and built them into new projects. Why admit this? It would mean admitting that before official New York, another city existed, another civilization, and that destroys the narrative.
But the strangest place where this narrative falls apart is a place millions have seen but few have thought about its true meaning. A place where symbols scream that something more happened here than we are told. Grand Central Terminal, New York's Central Station, opened in 1913. Walk into the main concourse. Look up. The ceiling. Green with golden constellations. The zodiac. 2,500 stars lit from within. Beautiful. Impressive. Now, notice this. The zodiac is reversed. The constellations are depicted not as we see them from Earth, but as they would look if looking at the celestial sphere from the outside. A mirror image. The official explanation, the artist Paul César Helieu made a mistake. He mixed up the projection. Helieu was a French master muralist who worked on European cathedrals, a man who knew astronomy and symbolism at an expert level, and he mixed it up? There is another interpretation. In medieval manuscripts, a reversed zodiac is a symbol of the Creator's view. God looks at the world from outside the celestial sphere. This is a sacred code used in temples and cathedrals. Why put such a code in a train station? Unless it's not a train station, unless it's a temple. Look at the architecture of Grand Central. It's not just a transport hub, it's a building constructed like a cathedral. The main concourse is 275 feet long, 120 feet wide, and the ceiling is 125 feet high. The proportions are close to the golden ratio. Such proportions are characteristic of Gothic cathedrals. Marble columns, arched vaults, stairs designed so that the movement of people resembles a procession. Why such grandeur for a station? Officially, a demonstration of the power of the railroad company, a symbol of progress. But look at the details. On the western facade, there is a sculptural composition. 3 figures: Mercury, god of commerce, Hercules, strength, and Minerva, wisdom, a classic triad. But beneath them is a less noticeable detail, an eagle with outstretched wings holding lightning bolts in its claws. The eagle with lightning is an ancient symbol of power going back to the Roman Empire, but it is also a crest used on maps of Tartaria in the 18th century. Coincidence? Maybe. But let's go downstairs. Beneath the main concourse of Grand Central is another level, the lower concourse, platforms for commuter trains, and lower still, technical rooms, tunnels, and below that? Official diagrams show 2 underground levels. Tourist maps show 2 as well, but if you talk to station workers, especially the old-timers, they talk about additional levels. In 2014, journalist Steve Duncan, specializing in urban exploration, gained access to service areas of Grand Central for a documentary project. He went down with an engineer to the 2nd underground level, and he saw a staircase going even deeper. The engineer said, "That's an old shaft, not in use." Duncan asked, "Where does it lead?" The engineer, "I don't know. It was closed off during construction." Duncan asked for permission to go down. He was refused. He described this moment in an article. "I shone my flashlight down. The stairs went down about 40 or 50 feet. The steps were stone, worn down, clearly old, much older than the station itself. At the bottom, darkness and an echo, like there was a void, a large space." After the article was published, Duncan was banned from further access to the station's service areas. What is down there? There's an urban legend. Among New York diggers, people who explore underground tunnels, there are rumors of Level J. On official maps, the levels of Grand Central are marked with letters A, Main Concourse, B, Lower Concourse, and C, Technical. That's it. But in old engineering blueprints from the 1920s that sometimes surface at auctions or in private collections, there are references to levels up to J, 7 additional levels. Skeptics say these are design plans that were never realized, architect fantasies. But in 2007, a digger known as Subway Creatures claimed he found an entrance to Level E through an abandoned tunnel connecting Grand Central to a former post office station. He described it, a large hall with columns, empty, covered in dust. The floor was a mosaic, partially destroyed. The walls were tile, similar to the main concourse, but a different color. He took a few photos, low quality, dark. In them you can indeed see columns and a fragment of a floor pattern. He planned to return with better equipment, but a week later the entrance was walled up, a concrete wall, as if nothing had ever been there. Subway Creatures disappeared from the internet a month later. His blog and the forums where he posted were all deleted. Only screenshots of his messages remain. Whether this is truth or a hoax is unknown, but the question remains. If there are indeed additional levels under Grand Central, why are they hidden? Security? Possibly. Old structures could be dangerous, or there is something there that shouldn't be public knowledge. When digging into this topic, I found dozens of similar stories. People who saw something underground in New York, tried to talk, and faced consequences. Individually, these cases seem like strange coincidences, but together they form a pattern. And that pattern is silence, a systemic, consistent silence from everyone who tried to get to the truth. Let's see how far this goes. Archaeologist David Kendall, whom we spoke of at the beginning, appears again. He no longer works at the university. He lives quietly, in private practice. But on an alternative history forum, a user named DK Archaeology begins publishing detailed descriptions of finds made during the Wall Street excavations in 2003. Photos of those same 3 levels of foundations, measurements, analysis of materials. His conclusion: the bottom level was made of stone processed with technology not used in North America until the late 19th century. Yet a radiocarbon analysis of organic inclusions in the mortar gives a date, the 1730s. A paradox. How could technology from 150 years in the future be used in the 1730s?
DK Archaeology suggests the technology didn't appear in the 19th century, it was rediscovered or copied from earlier examples. The posts gain attention, hundreds of comments, people ask for more data. 2 weeks later, the account is deleted. All posts are erased. A few users saved screenshots. They look real. They don't look like fakes. Was it really Kendall? Unknown, but the coincidences are alarming. Journalist Mark Reynolds publishes an article in the New York Observer, Secrets Beneath Our Feet. He interviews several subway workers who talk about strange finds in the tunnels. One of them, Frank Morales, describes a room discovered during repairs on Line 1 in the Chambers Street area. A room behind a brick wall. Inside, furniture, a table, chairs, covered in dust, and on the table, papers. Morales says, "I took one. It was a newspaper, the New York Herald, date March 12, 1852. The newspaper was whole. It didn't crumble, like the room had been closed yesterday." Reynolds tries to get a comment from the transit authority. They refuse. They say, no rooms were discovered. Perhaps the worker was mistaken. Reynolds wants to continue the investigation, but the editor of The Observer decides not to publish a follow-up. Officially, insufficient facts. Reynolds leaves The Observer. He tries to work as a freelancer. No one will take his articles anymore. In a 2005 interview, he said, "After that article, I became toxic for newsrooms. They didn't tell me directly, but the hints were clear. Don't touch this topic." The blogger, Urban Explorer. His story of disappearance is clouded in rumors. No, there is one detail few know. 3 days before his blog was deleted, he communicated in private messages with several subscribers. One of them, a Reddit user named TunnelRat88, saved the chat. Urban Explorer wrote, "I was on level J. It exists. It's not just a corridor. It's an entire hall with platforms for trains. But the rails don't go where modern lines go. They go deeper, under the river. I don't know where." TunnelRat88 asked, "Did you take photos?" Urban Explorer, "Yes, but the camera broke on the way out. All files are corrupted. Only one file opened. I'll upload it tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. Blog deleted. Contact lost. That one file surfaced a year later on a forum. A blurry photo. Darkness, a flashlight beam, and in it a fragment of a tiled wall. On the tile is a pattern, geometric, repeating. Enthusiasts analyzed the pattern. It is similar to ornaments used in European architecture of the 18th century, Baroque style. Fake it? You could, but why do that and then vanish? There are dozens of such cases. The engineer who found the old rails, transferred. The archaeologist with the finds, fired. The journalist, blacklisted. The blogger, vanished. You could say coincidences. People change jobs, get tired of a topic, delete accounts for personal reasons. But when it repeats again and again, the pattern becomes obvious. Someone did not want this information to spread. But who and why? There are different theories. One, city authorities. They don't want panic. Admitting the existence of vast underground structures could raise questions about safety, soil stability, and potential collapses. 2. Private interests. Manhattan's underground space is a resource, land beneath the land. If there are unaccounted levels, it affects property and development rights. 3. Cultural historical. Admitting that a different city is hidden under New York destroys the established narrative of American history. We came, we built, we created. If it turns out we built on top of someone else's work, it undermines identity. 4. The most controversial. Hiding the traces of Tartaria. There is a theory of a global cover-up of a massive civilization that controlled much of the world, Tartaria. After its fall, be it disaster, war, or something else, the victors erased the traces. They rewrote history. New York is one piece of this puzzle. I am not claiming this is the truth. I am saying this is one interpretation that explains the facts. And if we put it all together, the maps, the buildings, the underground levels, the silence of witnesses, we see that much more is hidden under New York than just old tunnels. Perhaps the answer to the questions of who we are and where we come from is hidden there. So, let's collect what we know. Fact. Beneath Manhattan, there is a layer of fill dirt 23 to 33 feet thick, buried in the early 19th century. The volume of burial is millions of cubic meters. Fact. In this layer, fragments of buildings, foundations, and paved roads have been discovered. The quality of some structures exceeds the standards of that time. Fact. Many New York buildings built between 1880 and 1920 contain architectural and technological elements inexplicably advanced for their time. Fact. There is evidence of underground levels under Grand Central and other key sites not marked on official maps. Fact. People who tried to investigate or speak about these finds systematically faced obstacles, firings, or disappearances. What does this mean? There are several interpretations. Ordinary history. New York developed chaotically. They built, rebuilt, and buried old foundations for the sake of new ones. The 1811 grading was just ordinary urban reorganization. Strangeness in architecture is the result of brilliant but forgotten masters. The silence of witnesses is coincidence, bureaucracy, or personal reasons. This version explains a lot, but not everything. It doesn't explain fill volumes exceeding the soil removed. It doesn't explain the quality of foundations found by accident. It doesn't explain the systemic pattern of silencing. A disaster. In the early 19th century, a natural disaster occurred, a flood, an earthquake, or soil liquefaction. The city partially sank. The authorities decided not to restore it, but to bury it and build anew. Admitting the disaster would have undermined trust in the city and scared off investors. This version explains the burial, the dates, and the silence of the authorities. But it doesn't explain the quality of the structures found underground. If it was just a regular colonial town, why is there stone, marble, and complex architecture? Tartaria. Beneath New York are the remains of a civilization built by a civilization before official American history. Tartaria is the name of this civilization on old maps. It controlled vast territories, possessed advanced technologies, and built cities of stone.
Local anomaly. There was indeed something unusual under New York, but not a global civilization, rather a local phenomenon. Perhaps a forgotten colony of Europeans from the 17th century who built more and better than we think, or an outpost of another culture, Norse, Mediterranean, or unknown. This version is a compromise. It doesn't require rewriting all of history, but acknowledges the anomaly. Which version is correct? I don't know. I cannot know, because access to full data is unavailable. Archives are closed. Underground levels are sealed. Witnesses are silent. But I know one thing. The questions exist, and they are valid. Look at a map, a modern map of Manhattan's underground structures. It shows subway lines, water tunnels, and cable communications. Everything is clear and understandable. Now, if you overlay this map with old city plans from the 1800s, oddities appear. There are sections where modern subway tunnels bypass certain zones. They make curves and loops instead of going straight. Engineers explain this with geology, rocky outcrops, unstable soil. But there are documents from the 1920s where subway engineers note bypass of the site carried out on the insistence of the city department, reasons not specified. What is there in those bypassed zones? One of them is under the City Hall area, where the oldest subway station in New York, the City Hall Station, is located, closed in 1945. Officially, it was closed due to low passenger traffic. No enthusiasts point out the station was the most beautiful in the system. Arched vaults, Guastavino tile, chandeliers. Why close such a thing? And also, beneath the station there is a branch, an old tunnel going deeper. It is walled up, but on old diagrams from 1904 it is marked as a service passage to the lower level. A lower level of what? I cannot give you answers. I can only ask questions, and I urge you to do the same. Because the truth is not what we are told. The truth is what we find for ourselves. What would change if the authorities of New York held a press conference tomorrow and said, yes, there are 7 more levels under New York. There are remains of another city there. We knew, but we hid it. Would history change, or only our perception of it? Would the facts change, or only how we interpret them? And here is the real question. If the truth is so easy to hide, how much else is hidden? Not just under New York, but beneath our entire reality. What do we consider the truth, and who decides what the truth is? Think about it. Look for answers, and share them. Because the city under New York is not just a story about buildings and streets. It is a story about how easy it is to forget, and how important it is to remember.